The first sign something was wrong with my dog came when he started vomiting in the backyard violently, and out of nowhere. I'd just gotten home from a double shift at the emergency vet clinic, still wearing my scrubs, when I spotted Max hunched over by the fence line, drool thick and foamy hanging from his jaws. He's a 5-year-old golden retriever, healthy, active, and basically my shadow. So, when he didn't come running the second I pulled into the driveway, I knew something was off. I sprinted to him, already shifting into vet tech mode. Pupils dilated, gums pale, slight tremors in his back legs. I scooped him up, ran him inside, and within 5 minutes had a blood panel running and an 4 hooked up. I wasn't just panicking, I was furious. Something had poisoned my dog, and I had a gut feeling about who it was. Her name was Cheryl. Cheryl Whitmore, 50-something, helmet blonde bob, lived 3 doors down, and was the self-appointed queen of the Oak Ridge HOA. Officially, she was the vice chair, but everyone knew she ran the board like a dictator in a floral cardigan. If your grass was a half-inch too high, she'd leave a warning taped to your door. If your trash cans weren't back by 10:01 on a Monday, she'd fine you. And if you had any animals, well, she hated those most of all. She'd complained about Max before. Too loud when he barked at squirrels. Too aggressive when he chased a ball near her mailbox. Last week, she cornered me while I was washing my truck. You know dogs aren't even allowed off leash in front yards, she snapped, arms crossed like she was holding in a fart. He wasn't off leash, I said, not even looking up. He was tethered. Still a liability. Especially big ones like that. They're unpredictable. I'd ignored her then, but now I remembered every word. I also remembered the patch of dead grass by the side fence 2 days ago. I thought it was just someone spraying pesticides too close to the property line. But now, I wasn't so sure. Max whimpered beside me on the couch while I prepped a vomit sample. I'd already drawn blood and run coag panels. His clotting times were shot classic anticoagulant rodenticide. Rat bait? The kind that causes internal bleeding over hours. I didn't just guess. I knew. I'd seen this before in the clinic. And I also knew the law. In our county, it was a crime, felony animal cruelty to intentionally poison someone's pet. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed with Max, monitored his vitals, and documented every single detail. Photos of the vomit, the chewed patch of grass, the faint blue-green specks in the soil near the fence where he'd been sick. I collected samples in sterile bags, labeled everything. I wasn't just treating my dog, I was building a case. The next morning, I walked outside with Max. He was stable but still weak, and found Cheryl standing on the sidewalk, arms folded, staring at my yard like it offended her existence. You should really consider rehoming that much, she said, not even blinking. I stepped between her and Max. You poisoned my dog? She blinked, fake shocked. Excuse me. You heard me. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe if your animal didn't dig in other people's property, it wouldn't get sick. That was it? That slip? She just admitted he'd been on other people's property. The exact spot near the fence, her side of the property line. I didn't say another word. Just stared at her until she walked away. That same day, I went over to my neighbor Todd's place. He lived on the other side of Cheryl and had a ring cam that covered part of her backyard. I told him what happened. He didn't need convincing. She's always been nuts about animals, he said. Yeah, I'll pull the footage. Give me an hour. What he found made my blood run cold. 2 nights ago, just before midnight, Cheryl had crept along the fence line on my side of the property and knelt down. In her hand, a Ziploc bag which she emptied into the grass. The camera didn't catch what was inside, but I already knew. I saved a copy, burned it to a USB, labeled it, then printed stills with timestamps. I spent the next 2 days gathering everything. Medical records, soil samples, toxicology reports, photos, camera footage. I filed a formal complaint with animal control, then took everything to the police. The officer at the desk looked skeptical until I handed him the USB. This is her, I said. This is Cheryl Whitmore, vice chair of the Oak Ridge HOA. She poisoned my dog. He didn't argue. Just asked for my contact info and promised a detective would follow up. They did less than 24 hours later. The officer showed up at my door, took an official statement, and requested I bring Max in for a vet exam from a DVM who could write an affidavit. I did that the next morning. The vet confirmed everything, classic symptoms of anticoagulant poisoning confirmed by lab work. There was no way this was accidental. Someone had placed the bait inside my yard. The cop nodded solemnly. You've done all the work for us. Exactly what I wanted to hear. I didn't see Cheryl for a few days after that. Probably hiding in her house, sensing something was coming. But the HOA wasn't quiet. The board, who usually backed her every move, started murmuring. I caught whispers at the mailbox, neighbors asking each other, "Did you hear what she did to that guy's dog?" Apparently, word was spreading. Then came the HOA meeting. They held it at the community clubhouse as usual. I showed up early, USB in hand, printed reports in a folder. The room was tense, more homeowners than usual, all whispering. Cheryl wasn't there yet. When she finally walked in, everyone went quiet. She acted like nothing was wrong. Sat at the head of the table. Adjusted her nameplate. Tried to call the meeting to order. I stood up. Before we start, I said, I've got something the board and everyone here needs to see. Cheryl froze. I handed the USB to the HOA secretary, who plugged it into the projector. The footage played. Silence. Then gasps. Cheryl's face drained of color. I caught her eyes darting to the exit. "Oh, and I've already given this to the police," I added. "They're building a case. But I figured the community should know what kind of person is sitting on this board." The room erupted. Homeowners shouting, demanding she resign, calling her a monster. She tried to talk over them. "This is a setup. That footage is doctored." But no one believed her. Not after the footage. Not after the reports. I stood back and watched the whole thing, arms crossed. I'd waited for this moment. She had no idea who she'd messed with. Cheryl didn't show her face in public for over a week after that HOA meeting. Her car stayed parked crooked in her driveway. Curtains closed so tight they might as well have been nailed to the frame. But the fallout from that night didn't stop with her. The neighborhood had questions, and not the quiet kind. 2 days after the meeting, Todd called me as I was checking Max's hydration levels. He was recovering well, eating again, playing gently, tail wagging with a little more strength, but I was still keeping him under close watch. "You might want to check your mailbox," Todd said. "Looks like the rest of the board's starting to feel the heat." I pulled on a hoodie, walked outside, and opened the mailbox. Inside was a plain envelope with no return address. I opened it at the curb. Inside were copies of 2 internal emails from the HOA board, one from the chair, Miriam Lopez, dated 3 months ago. All, Cheryl has requested authorization to distribute pest control granules along the fence lines bordering her property. I'm hesitant. Our bylaws prohibit chemical dispersal without notifying adjacent homeowners. Thoughts? The second email was from Cheryl herself, replying, "All authorization is unnecessary in this case. I've already handled it. The problem won't persist much longer." Below that was a timestamp. 1 week before Max got sick. I folded the pages carefully, slid them back into the envelope, and headed inside. Now I had evidence not just of what she did, but that the HOA board had prior knowledge something was going on and said nothing. Maybe they hadn't known the extent, but they hadn't stopped her either. That night I made some calls. First, to the detective assigned to the case. I let him know I had new material, emails suggesting premeditation with potential negligence from the board. He was quiet for a moment before asking if I'd be willing to testify to the timeline in court. "Absolutely," I said. "I've kept everything. Dates, timestamps, samples. I can walk a jury through it in chronological order without missing a beat." Then I called an attorney. A friend of my cousin's, someone who specialized in property disputes and civil litigation. When I laid out the details, she asked, "Do you want criminal charges, or are you thinking civil action, too?" "Both," I said. "She didn't just hurt my dog. She endangered the entire neighborhood. Kids play out there. Pets roam. She could have killed someone's toddler." The attorney told me something I hadn't considered. Under our state law, HOAs that knowingly engage in or enable illegal activity can be held liable as an entity. That meant the entire Oak Ridge HOA might be on the hook, not just Cheryl. Start thinking bigger, she said. Especially if you want the board gone. I didn't just want them gone. I wanted them replaced with people who actually cared about the neighborhood, not just enforcing power with a clipboard and a smug attitude. The following week, a plain sedan pulled into Cheryl's driveway just before 7 in the morning. I watched from my porch as two plainclothes officers stepped out, knocked once, and waited. She opened the door in a bathrobe, hair a frazzled mess, mascara smudged like she hadn't slept. They spoke for less than 5 minutes before she stepped back inside and re-emerged with a small purse. One officer took her arm not roughly, but firmly and guided her to the car. She didn't resist, but she didn't meet anyone's eyes either. The car pulled away silently. Later that day, I got a call from the detective. We've filed charges. Misdemeanor animal cruelty at minimum. But with your documentation and the vet affidavit, we're pushing for felony intent. I hung up and walked Max around the block. Every neighbor we passed stopped to ask how he was doing. Every one of them offered a pat, a treat, or a kind word. Something had shifted in Oak Ridge. People weren't just afraid of the HOA anymore, they were angry. By the end of the month, things escalated. A group of residents led by Todd, Miriam's next-door neighbor, and a woman named Priya who worked in city zoning filed a formal petition to remove the entire HOA board. They needed signatures from 30% of homeowners to trigger a special election. They got over 40 in a single weekend. Miriam called an emergency meeting to try and stop it. She stood at the front of the clubhouse, visibly sweating, and tried to blame Cheryl alone. We had no idea she was doing anything illegal. We trusted her judgment. You didn't stop her, Priya said, standing from the third row. You had concerns. You documented them, and then you ignored them. Miriam's voice wavered. She acted alone. I stood up. She acted with your silence, I said. And I've got proof. You all saw the emails. Murmurs turned into full-on shouting. Someone yelled that their cat had gotten sick around the same time. Another said they'd found green pellets in their flower beds. No one had wanted to say anything before, but now the floodgates were open. The vote to dissolve the board passed by a landslide. Within a week, a temporary committee was formed. Priya volunteered to chair it. Todd joined the finance subcommittee. I was asked to help review safety and bylaws. That's when we discovered something else. The HOA had dipped into reserve funds earlier that summer, nearly $20,000 for what they labeled as pest mitigation services. But there were no invoices, no contractor names. Just a signed approval from Cheryl. The committee brought in an auditor. He traced the withdrawal to a cashier's check deposited into a shell account under the name Oak Ridge Environmental Solutions. It didn't exist. The account was closed 2 days after the deposit. The money was gone. We submitted the findings to the police and added them to the civil case. Cheryl wasn't just facing cruelty charges, now she was looking at fraud and embezzlement. At the same time, I worked with the new committee to rewrite our bylaws. We added protections. Any chemical treatment within 10 feet of a property line required written consent from neighbors. Security cameras were protected by default, no HOA interference allowed. And most importantly, no board member could authorize spending over $500 without full board approval and a signed receipt. The new rules passed unanimously. 3 months later, Cheryl pled guilty to felony animal cruelty and misdemeanor fraud. She took a plea deal, 18 months probation, permanent ban from serving on any HOA board, and over $5,000 in restitution. She sold her house within 2 weeks of the sentencing and moved out overnight. No one came to help her pack. As for Max, he made a full recovery. His energy came back stronger than ever. We celebrated his 6th birthday with a barbecue in the cul-de-sac. Half the neighborhood showed up. Some brought their dogs. Someone even made a sign that read, "Max, the dog who took down the dictator." I kept it, framed it in my living room. We didn't just get justice. We got our neighborhood back. And Cheryl? She learned the hard way that poisoning a vet tech's dog isn't just cruel, it's career-ending. The first official meeting of the interim neighborhood committee was held in Priya's garage, folding chairs arranged in a semicircle around a whiteboard that still had last year's Halloween decoration plans faintly scribbled on it. The air buzzed with a strange mix of relief and cautious energy. For the first time in years, residents were talking to each other without the ambient dread of being reported for leaving their porch lights on too late. Priya stood at the front, dry erase marker in hand, already listing tasks that needed addressing. I sat near the back, flipping through a printout of the forensic audit results we'd received only a day earlier. Most people in the room were focused on things like landscaping contracts, mailbox repairs, and community events, but I couldn't stop thinking about what the auditor had found buried in the transactional history. There was a payment buried 6 months back, just under $5,000, to an entity labeled Neighborhood Safety Consulting. It had been signed off by both Cheryl and a man named Levi Garrison, the former treasurer. Except there was no record of any safety review or consultation ever taking place. No inspection paperwork, no contact info, just the payout. After the meeting wrapped up, I caught up with Todd as he packed up the extra chairs. "Did you ever meet this Levi guy?" I asked. He shook his head. "He moved last spring. Said he got a job in Kansas. Never saw him again after that." "Convenient." Todd leaned against the workbench. "You think he's wrapped up in this too?" "I think Cheryl didn't act alone. And if someone signed off on a fake invoice, that makes them complicit." I didn't waste time. That night, I emailed the detective handling Cheryl's case. I included the audit excerpt, along with a note: "Possible accomplice. No contact info. Might have fled jurisdiction." The next morning, I got a reply saying they were forwarding the information to the Economic Crimes Division. Within a week, a subpoena was issued to Cheryl's bank. What came back cracked the whole thing wide open. The bank records showed that Cheryl had transferred funds from the HOA account into 5 different shell businesses over the course of a single year. Neighborhood Safety Consulting was just one of them. Another was Community Utility Advisors, which supposedly reviewed our water lines. Yet another was Oak Ridge Wildlife Risk Services, which claimed to have done an animal control sweep the month before Max was poisoned. There were no service logs, no receipts, no contact numbers, not even a website. But the money didn't disappear. It moved. From the fake businesses, the funds were transferred to a second account under Cheryl's maiden name. From there, it was used for mortgage payments, credit card bills, and even a lease on a second vehicle, a luxury SUV no one in the neighborhood had ever seen. It wasn't just animal cruelty anymore. It was wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. The district attorney's office got involved, and suddenly Cheryl's plea deal didn't look so secure. I was called back in to give another statement, this time under oath. The DA assigned to the case was precise, no nonsense, and clearly itching to bring the hammer down. "You said she used anticoagulant rodenticide, correct?" I nodded. "Confirmed by lab tests. I preserved the samples, and the independent vet wrote a full affidavit." "Was there any indication she tried to conceal the bait?" "No. It was scattered in the grass, unmarked. It looked like fertilizer in granule form. If a kid had picked it up." He raised his eyebrows. "We're going to charge her with reckless endangerment of a minor, too. There's enough precedent." That week, Cheryl was arrested again. This time, it wasn't a gentle knock at her door. It was a full warrant execution. Detectives and forensic accountants in unmarked jackets, boxes carried out of her garage, electronics seized. I watched from across the street with Max at my side. She was let out in handcuffs, head down, silent. No bathrobe this time, just a gray sweatshirt and faded jeans. She didn't fight it. She didn't speak. The news hit local media within hours. HOA vice chair accused of embezzling tens of thousands, poisoning dog. There was a photo of Max, tail mid-wag, with a little bandage still wrapped around his front leg. I hadn't known the reporter had snapped it during the birthday barbecue. It ran on the front page of the city section. The ripple effect spread fast. 2 nearby neighborhoods dissolved their HOA boards within the month. A city council member even reached out to Priya, asking if she'd be willing to speak at a town hall on HOA reform. She accepted, then asked if I'd join her. "I'm not a public speaker," I told her. "You don't need to be," she said. "You just need to tell the truth." So I did. The town hall was held at the community center downtown. Standing room only. People from all over the county packed the room, some with horror stories of their own. One guy said his HOA fined him for having a flag on his porch during a non-holiday. Another woman said her board tried to evict her elderly mother over a misplaced planter. When it was my turn, I stood behind the mic, took a breath, and told the room exactly what happened. I didn't embellish. I didn't rant. I laid out the facts, what Cheryl did, what the board allowed, how they funneled funds through fake companies, and how it all started with a dog getting sick in his own backyard. When I was done, the room erupted in applause. I wasn't proud, I was angry. Angry that it had taken something this egregious to wake people up. But at least now they were listening. Back in Oak Ridge, the interim committee evolved into a permanent neighborhood council. No more forced dues. No more arbitrary fines. Everything was voluntary and transparent. We partnered with the local shelter to host adoption events. We added a community bulletin board by the park. Someone even started a dog walking group. One afternoon, as I was patching a section of the fence Max had chewed as a puppy, Priya stopped by with a clipboard. "State AG's office finished their review," she said. "They're going to recommend indictments for the rest of the former board. Not just Cheryl." I looked up. Miriam too? She signed off on 3 of the fake payments. Claimed she didn't read the line items. She'll read the sentencing memo. Priya didn't laugh, but the corner of her mouth twitched. "You know, this whole mess? It made people pay attention. We've had more volunteers in the last 2 months than we've had in 5 years. I straightened up. They finally realized the HOA wasn't the neighborhood. We are. As summer turned to fall, Max regained all his energy, and then some. He chased squirrels like they owed him money. Every kid in the cul-de-sac knew his name. One even built him a cardboard hero medal with glitter glue and a paw print on it. I hung it next to his leash. The case against Cheryl moved to trial. She withdrew her plea deal after the new charges were added over a dozen counts, including felony embezzlement, mail fraud, and endangerment. Her lawyer tried to argue mental fatigue, stress, even online harassment. But the evidence was airtight. When I testified, I brought the original sample containers. The court technician displayed the toxicology results. The jury didn't even look confused, just disgusted. The verdict came back in less than a day. Guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with no parole for at least 4. She'd be required to pay restitution to the HOA and the neighborhood fund. Her assets were frozen. The house she'd once ruled from like a petty monarch, scheduled for auction. As I walked out of the courthouse, Max waiting patiently in my truck, I felt something settle in my chest for the first time since that awful night in the backyard. Not satisfaction, not revenge, resolution. She thought she could get away with it, that no one would fight back, that she could poison a dog and hide behind bureaucracy. She never expected I'd be the one person in this neighborhood trained to uncover everything she tried to bury. And she sure as hell didn't expect the whole neighborhood to rally behind the dog. The city auctioned off Cheryl's house in early spring. The new owners were a retired couple from Minnesota who had no idea what kind of havoc had played out inside those beige stucco walls. They stopped by one afternoon while I was replacing the weather seal on my garage door. Max trotted over to them immediately, tail wagging like they were old friends. "He's a sweetheart," the woman said, kneeling to scratch behind his ears. "Golden retrievers always seem to know who the good ones are, don't they?" I gave a small nod. "He's got a good sense for character." Earned it the hard way. They moved in a week later. Fresh coat of paint, new landscaping. Cheryl's rose bushes were ripped out by the roots, replaced with native plants and a small bird bath. I didn't miss the roses. The replacement council had settled into its rhythm. The spring newsletter went out without a single passive-aggressive note about trash bins or mailbox decor. Most of the neighborhood now functioned on mutual respect instead of fear. At Priya's suggestion, we started monthly open forums where residents could raise concerns directly. No fines, no threats, just discussion. For the first time in years, people actually showed up. But just as the dust seemed to settle, the district attorney's office made an announcement that brought everything roaring back into focus. The investigation into Cheryl's finances had expanded massively. It turned out the HOA wasn't the only place she'd been siphoning funds from. The local community development grant program, a city-run initiative meant to funnel money into neighborhood beautification and infrastructure repairs, had disbursed over $80,000 to Oak Ridge over the past 3 years. That money was supposed to be used for sidewalk improvements, storm drain clearing, and park maintenance. None of that work had been done. Instead, the funds were funneled through the same shell entities Cheryl had used to embezzle from the HOA. The same fake companies. The same laundering trail. But this time, the money hadn't just come from homeowners, it had come from city grants. Public funds. The scope of the crime changed overnight. The DA's office issued a statement. Cheryl was now being charged under federal statutes. Wire fraud, misuse of public funds, and conspiracy to defraud a government program. The total amount exceeded $120,000. The U.S. Attorney's Office took over the case within a week. I was subpoenaed again, this time to testify in a federal grand jury hearing. It wasn't just about Max anymore, it was about unraveling a web of fraud that had touched multiple public agencies. The vet affidavit and toxicology reports were still part of the evidence packet, but now they were joined by financial analysts, auditors, and forensic accountants. The hearing lasted 6 hours. I was on the stand for less than 20 minutes. The federal prosecutor only asked one question about Max. Why did you start documenting everything? Because it didn't feel like a mistake, I answered. It felt deliberate. And I've seen enough deliberate cruelty to know what it looks like. That was all he needed. The grand jury returned an indictment. Cheryl was formally charged with 5 federal crimes. Her original state-level sentence was vacated in favor of the new charges. She was transferred to a federal detention center 3 counties over. Her defense attorney tried to claim diminished capacity due to stress, but the court-appointed psychiatrist dismissed it after 1 session. She was completely aware of her actions, the report read. And she believed she would never be caught. The trial date was set for early summer. In the meantime, the city froze any remaining funds allocated to Oak Ridge. That meant no council reimbursements, no park funds, no infrastructure work until the audit was completed. The neighborhood had to run on volunteers alone. We didn't complain. Folks stepped up. Todd organized storm drain cleanouts with a group of teenagers from the local high school. Priya negotiated with a local landscaping company to donate mulch for the community garden. I patched up the dog run fence behind the park with 2 other residents I barely knew before all this started. We got it done in a weekend. At the federal courthouse, I testified again. This time, Cheryl was there in person. No cardigan, no smug demeanor, just an ill-fitted suit and the hollow expression of someone who finally understood the gravity of her situation. The prosecutor walked the jury through everything, the shell companies, the fake invoices, the misuse of public funds. They showed the footage of her poisoning Max only once, but it landed with more weight than any spreadsheet ever could. They brought in a city contractor who confirmed that none of the work listed on Cheryl's invoices had ever been scheduled. They brought in a former HOA board member, one who had resigned quietly 6 months before Cheryl's arrest, who testified that Cheryl insisted on handling all financial transactions herself. She even refused offers to bring in a third-party accountant. The defense tried to argue that the board shared the blame, that Cheryl had been acting under pressure, trying to fix the neighborhood when no one else would. The jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge didn't waste time with sentencing. Cheryl was given 11 years in federal prison with no chance of parole for 9. She was ordered to repay every penny of the embezzled funds, including damages to the city, the HOA, and individual homeowners. Her accounts were seized. Her assets liquidated. The restitution check I received covered exactly what I'd spent on Max's treatment. Nothing more. I didn't care. I'd never wanted her money. I wanted accountability. That summer, the city unfroze our neighborhood grants. The community council applied for a separate fund to build a small memorial garden in the park, nothing elaborate. Just a bench under a shade tree, a few native wildflowers, and a plaque that read, "In memory of those who protect without words." Max sat next to me at the dedication ceremony, tail thumping against the grass as kids ran by with juice boxes and popsicles. The mayor gave a short speech, then handed the mic to Priya, who kept it simple. This neighborhood stood up, and we're stronger for it. Afterward, one of the newer residents came up to me, a young guy named Miguel who'd bought a fixer-upper across from Cheryl's old house. He'd never known the full story. She really did all that? Over a dog. It wasn't just the dog, I said. But yeah, that's where it started. He looked at Max, who was now sprawled out under the bench like he owned the entire park. Well, Miguel said, he picked the right one to mess with. We laughed. But it wasn't bitter anymore. Felt clean. The council had its first full election that fall. No one ran unopposed. Everyone had to host a Q&A, submit a financial disclosure, and sign a conflict of interest statement. We built everything from scratch: transparency, oversight, trust. The old board's files were archived and sealed. The HOA was officially dissolved in the county registry. Oak Ridge wasn't ruled anymore. It was run by us. That winter, Max started graying around his muzzle. He still chased squirrels, still rolled in every patch of mud he could find, but his gait had slowed, and I could see the years in his eyes. He'd been through more than a dog ever should. On his 7th birthday, I gave him a new collar. Not because he needed one, just because it felt like the closing of a chapter. We'd been through the worst, and we were still standing. Some people never learn that consequences catch up. They think a title or a clipboard gives them immunity. But in Oak Ridge, we proved otherwise. All it took was a dog who wouldn't stop trusting and a neighbor who wouldn't stop documenting. Justice didn't come quickly, but it came.